All right, guys. My name is Rahul Mitra. I have been involved with EWB for about 8 years now, initially with the Austin chapter, but now here with the Washington, D.C. professional chapter. I'm currently working with CARE International as a water and sanitation engineer. I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Annie Devine. I am a development specialist with Cardno Emerging Markets, which is a large global engineering firm. I've spent the last decade working in post-conflict and conflict environments, mostly on education and economic development programming. But I've done a lot of different things with, I've used logical frameworks throughout all of my programming, which is why I'm here supporting Raul today.
Yeah, and so the tool that we're going to be presenting is a very exciting yet boring tool, but it's a very, very useful tool, we promise. It's also a requirement from EWB-USA, but we would recommend that you not look this as a requirement, but a really powerful tool in the project planning process. So a couple of years ago, EWB introduced the PMEL program, which is the Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning program. And the whole purpose of this is to structure EWB projects within one planning framework to introduce monitoring and evaluation within the planning process of the project, but also to drive meaningful data from these projects so that you can drive back into the planning and sort of iterate that process. There's a lot of content on the website, on the EWB website, regarding the framework, regarding instructions on how to go about filling out one of this paper. But this is just some of the semantics, the way that EWB defines a program and a project. The program is sort of a more overarching commitment that you are making to a community or a set of community. And the project is one task that you're completing. So within a program, you can have multiple projects. You can have a clean water project. You can have a sanitation project. You can have, building a bridge that can be a separate project. Now, the tool that we're presenting, the logical framework, is a project-level document. So if you have multiple projects within a program, you need to file a different log frame for each.
So just kind of a basic definition of what a logical framework is it's a tool for program conceptualization, design, monitoring, and evaluation. And we look at it as something that can be changed and kind of shifted throughout the entire process, which is why we kind of named our presentation from planning to implementation. So what it helps do is it really establish measurable and causally linked objectives, providing kind of a logical summary for the following questions. And it really helps you identify how to answer each of these questions and kind of what is the program going to achieve, what activities will be carried out, what means and resources and inputs are going to be provided, what potential problems could affect the success of the program, and assumptions. And we're going to talk through, you all have you actually have a handout with you right now. You should, if you haven't gotten one, there should be somewhere floating around the room. And each of these questions are answered within that, whether it be under assumptions or inputs or activities. And so we're going to kind of walk through that process. But this is really just what the tool does and how it helps us. So why do we fill this out? Again, it is a requirement. And it's not just a requirement for EWB. It's actually an industry-wide requirement. So pretty much every donor and NGO uses this tool kind of across the board, whether it be in an engineering project or any other type of project, from education to economic development. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But most importantly, log frames are living documents. And as I said, it can be used throughout the entire planning. It should be used throughout the entire planning and implementation process. And I can't kind of emphasize that enough, that this is not a document that's kind of just completed and then put to the side. It's something that you want to kind of continually refer back to. So I just wanted to throw this up there. You're going to see a lot of language. We're going to use the EWB language as much as we possibly can. Like I said, I am actually new to EWB, so their language is something different than I've used before. But language is not important here. And call us out. Please, I want this to be interactive as well. So if you have a question in the middle of all this, please feel free to raise your hand as well. And call us out if we use some language that doesn't make sense to you, or we've kind of conflated some words, because that will happen, because as you see, this is just a laundry list of different ways that people kind of do their own logical frameworks and the type of wording that they use. So just kind of keep that in mind. But what we're really focusing on in this session is how to think through logically this model and how to kind of build it out. And we encourage that any kind of NGO framework that you use, just make sure you go back to the donor and or NGO template and kind of use those as best as you can. So who's involved? Everybody. This is a stakeholder, everyone should be involved in this process. This is from the community to the government. This is not something that should be done at headquarters. This is something that frequently happens at headquarters. You know, you're rushed, you've got to put this thing together, everyone's kind of, you know, we got to get either our project plan in, or we have to get our, you know, a proposal in, and so it ends up being done by just a handful of people. That's really not how you should look at this document. That's not the best way to do it, and so I just really encourage you to kind of start using it early, think about this process early, and use it as a planning process instead of a last-minute thought on all of this.
And if I may add, I think it's very important within the community itself to engage all different stakeholders. So in this picture, this is a picture that I took in Cameroon while I was there, and the community is sort of half divided between this Muslim tribe and this Christian tribe. And the men you see on the right, they were sort of living on the outskirts of the community, really hard to get to, but they were a significant aspect of the community. So to engage them was very important, and this was one of the sessions that we had in creating the Logframe that we produced. So just what the Logframe really forces you to do almost is to think within this framework where you're looking at the overall goal that you're trying to achieve through a program, and then sort of break it down into the different aspects till you have project activities. These are the inputs, the things, the tangible work that you're actually putting into the community. Drilling a borehole, or educating this committee, or doing a public health study, or constructing a bridge. You then have outputs of what happens after you've implemented this. And after you have outputs, you have outcomes. What is the human effect of this output? And that relates to the wider goal. So as you plan the project, you're sort of working your way from the top down. And as you're implementing, you're sort of working from the bottom up. So just keep this in mind, and we will come back to this again and again. You'll see this over and over again through the presentation. So this is the handout that we gave to you guys, and is the framework that EWB uses, and sort of gives you directions on how, what each field corresponds to and how to really develop this document. There's many ways to tackle this. Everyone has their preferred option, but the one that sort of we both agree on, let's put it that way, is to start with the first column. So the first column is the program summary and the overall, the structure of the project that you're implementing. And after you have the first column, you sort of work your way row by row from the top. So you look at what the program is trying to achieve. You look at indicators that you can assess. And then you look at means of verification. Now, these are ways you can measure those indicators to see if the project is actually working or not, if it needs to be modified to achieve the final goal. And then assumptions, which are very, very important. We go into a community with our sets of assumptions, and we need to constantly be thinking about those assumptions and changing them as we go along. Now, the first field that you saw, the overall goal. This is a very, very broad statement, an overarching goal that you have. What is the scope of your involvement in the community? Why is EWB this chapter in this random community somewhere in Africa or Southeast Asia or where not? And it's usually provided to you by the community. It's usually stated in the 501 application. This is what we want help with. So this is not something that you come up with. This is usually something that the community comes up with. One of the things that we see a lot is this is structured like to reduce or to improve the standard of education, or to reduce incidence of this disease in this community. The example is the community members would like to experience fewer incidents of waterborne illnesses in the community. So just to think about the overall goal and
And if
make
I
sure
could-
that all activities are associated with that.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in here quickly. The expectation for the overall goal is not that you would solve that problem entirely. What the component of your program or your project is really to kind of work towards impacting and making a kind of a dent in solving some of that goal. It's not, so it can be a fairly substantial goal, but you don't want to make it too big. We're not, solving poverty or something. That would be, that wouldn't quite work. But it is something that can be a little bit broader than something that you can solve alone with one project or one program. As you get further down, then it becomes a little bit more detailed, and you want to be able to make all of those steps actionable.
So the next step down that list are objectives. These are sort of the purpose of the project. What are ways that you can go and achieve that goal? It's sort of one step down from the overall problem statement, and usually you can say to increase performance of students in this community, or to increase access for students to the school if you're building a bridge, let's say. Access to potable water, a lot of us are working on water projects. So this is where you sort of have different objectives. Now, a project can have multiple objectives. It doesn't have to be just one statement. However, it makes sense to have each sort of goal or objective to be stated in one sentence instead of rambling on and having 2 or 3 sentences. One of the crucial things about this tool is you need to try and be concise. If you can articulate what you're trying to do and your theory of change of how you go about achieving that goal, if you can articulate that in one page, that says a lot. And that's why the handouts that we gave out is just one page, one A4 size page. So that summarizes the whole project. The next step is the expected results, and it's basically synonymous to outputs. This is the very sort of the physical manifestation of what activities you're actually doing. Now, words that we significantly use are delivered, produced, or changed. So you have trained some individuals, and don't just stop at trained, but like what is the effect of training them? Like they have an increased capacity for providing better healthcare. So that is an output of the inputs that I'll cover in the next slide. And at the bottom, you have the input. Now, this is usually what you actually implement in the field, or the work that you do in the country. Inputs or activities, again, a lot of the language is synonymous, so you can use multiple words, but some words you want to use when you're making a list of your different activities can be prepare, design, construct, procure. Now, this doesn't have to be 1 or 2 sentences. This can be a whole list of different tasks. But just think about how you are prioritizing everything. Think about like what the project goal is, and if you were to pick maybe 5 or 6, well, how would you rank them, and how would you summarize them in one field? Exactly. So examples of this can be to train the maintenance committee, be it a computer project, be it a road access project, be it water storage and whatnot. Procuring construction materials is a task. If you're going into some sort of agreement with the community, just having a contract with the community is also a tangible task that you're trying to do.
So as we mentioned, once you get kind of through the first column, then what we recommend is that you then start working horizontally across the sheet that you have. And so the next column is indicators. Indicators are going to look a little bit different, whether you're talking about the objective or the overall goal or the activities, obviously, because they are, some are more measurable than others. However, what an indicator really is the measurable and observable kind of data points that are directly related to whatever your objective, results, or activity is. So it helps you indicators are used to kind of track and record how well you've kind of planned a set of activities and how well they're being implemented, and assess whether or not your targets are being met. So some examples of indicators include kind of numbers of students that are attending schools, number of people surveyed who say they have access to the other side of the crossing if you've built a bridge, and number of vehicles crossing per day during the wettest season. Those are usually kind of would be aligned with, generally with your activities or inputs, and they're very kind of, that's something that probably the project team or the community is tracking on a daily basis and is very kind of closely related to that. Then you tend to, as you move into objectives and objectives, then you often get, and outcomes, you often get the more observed evidence of proper maintenance and site drainage around structure. So it can become a little bit more subjective. You do want to try to make it as objective as possible whenever you can, but we also kind of we also recognize that everything is not perfectly measurable in the development field, but when you're thinking through this, you want to think about how you are going to assess the impact of what you've done, and that some of that might be kind of anecdotal, and we hope that a lot more of it's going to be numbers. Yeah?
Okay, so this is the column I'm having a lot of trouble with.
Yeah.
Because the way that I interpreted the instructions is there's a table. If you have a structure project,
Mm-hmm.
there's a table where you're supposed to pick the indicators. There's 3 columns to this table. Are you guys familiar with
Yeah,
this?
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And we're supposed to pick from that table 3 indicators from each column. And then, so I'm having trouble picking them and fitting them into the right row.
Okay.
So I don't know if this is even the right place to be able to give any guidance on that.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
which one goes into the overall goal row versus which one goes to the expected results? That's really the
So it is a little bit confusing. It is. I agree. It's a little bit confusing because you're talking about the one that has like kind of the first. I can't remember all the language on it exactly, but the first column has a. The first column, I would say, normally goes into the activities because it's kind of a short-term, immediate results. It tends to be much more kind of number-oriented. The other 2 columns, they are much fuzzier, and I would say that I don't think. When I was looking at them, they didn't. They didn't fit that well. None of them fit that well for me into the kind of overall goal component. But the objective and the results, the other ones, you can use the other 2 columns because they're more long term to kind of look through that. Sorry, I wish I had actually had the example in front of me. I can't because I'm remembering it from reading it, but. Yeah, I actually didn't realize that you guys have to choose from those 3 columns in terms of to do this, because I haven't worked through it that way. Sorry.
So basically, on the EWB website, there's a lot of instructions on what are potential indicators. What I would recommend is to use that as a framework, but come up with your own brainstorming process. Meet with your whole team and the community, and then see how that matches up. I'm sure you will see a lot of commonalities where you can pull things from the EWB, but use that as a framework. Don't let that sort of limit you in your options of what you can measure and what success in your circumstance means to you. No EWB project, no 2 EWB project are the same, but there is significant similarities between them. So any structure, any framework will tend to be very general, broad-based. So.
But what I would say is that when you're kind of moving up the column and you're dealing with the outputs and the outcomes, what you're measuring and the numbers that you're kind of measuring should get bigger. So you should be looking at a much broader area, and as you move up, they tend to get more anecdotal. It's probably the way that I would say is the best way to kind of think about it. But again, as Raul said, I wouldn't use that only. I would definitely kind of do what you can to change it up. Okay, so the next column is means of verification. This actually often, a lot of people get this confused with indicators. The indicator is the data point itself. It's the number of schools that you've done. It's the number of crossings, whatever, as we've gone through. This is what source you're going to be using in order to measure that. So that could be a pre and post test. That could be a community report on a monthly basis. Somebody who's kind of watching the amount of usage or whatever that looks like. It also, as you kind of get up higher up in the indicators, as I said, sometimes you get these broader numbers that are kind of focusing on, maybe it's a percentage of, number of people in a given region that have access to whatever, and how you kind of compare to that. And that's when you can start using higher level data that the project itself might not necessarily collect. So what you want to do is identify where you're going to get this information. If you've created an indicator and you have no way of getting information on it, it's not a good indicator. So it's kind of one of those obvious statements, but if there is no source for it, then you haven't created a good indicator, and you need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how you're going to collect that data. And that's really what the means of verification helps you do, and that's why that column is so vital. A lot of people kind of overlook it. They're like, oh, we'll think about that later. Don't think about it later, because you might end up promising something that you cannot produce or provide, and that's particularly problematic for donors and for yourself. I mean, it's not just a programmatic thing, but it does kind of make it a little bit complicated.
So here's a bunch of examples, but I can give you some examples from my previous experience with EWB. This picture is basically showing us training the water committee on how to do water tests. And we actually left a lot of those testing kits, which are very, very inexpensive, if not free, with the community so that they can track the water quality across a period of time. And also the flow rates, which is very important. You have dry season, you have rainy season, and because our chapters cannot be in the community for prolonged periods of time, it's important to equip the community with the skills, but also the tools that they can record that data. And we were really surprised with how smart the people were. They didn't have formal education, but they were able to pick things up. So definitely try and see who in the community is takes initiative and comes to meetings and engage with those people in doing this sort of work.
So finally, assumptions. Assumptions are wildly important in this whole process. We make a lot of assumptions when we go into communities to do work with them, and that's okay. I mean, we have to. And really, what an assumption is something that's outside of your control. So that can be an event, conditions, decisions. I mean, political decisions that you can't control. And other external factors that may ultimately affect how the project is going to be rolled out. And you want to think about something like, to be successful, what kind of environment do you need? And you want to kind of think about what you are looking for to create a successful project and to ultimately get the results and make impact towards the overall goal. In the long run, and that's really what an assumption is doing. Now, I've kind of put up here. We've got three different types of assumptions. The first one is the very likely to hold true. If you have a signed contract with a donor over many, many years, it's pretty likely that that's going to hold true. Not 100%, but it's likely enough that it doesn't necessarily need to be something that goes into your assumptions column. You can just kind of, move on from that. You don't need something that's very, very true isn't necessarily something that's going to go into the assumptions column. Something that is a possible risk, exchange rates will remain stable, is an assumption that you're going to make regarding kind of long-term over the course of your project, or if you kind of are going to assume that there's going to be peace in your area. This is something that I've dealt with a lot in like conflict and post-conflict environments. There are certain things you have to say to either to the EWB or you have to say to a donor, like, we assume that there is going to be relative peace in this area for X number of years. If that does not hold true, then your project is not going to be successful. And that's fair enough. That is a possible risk. Then there's the very unlikely to hold true. You will get the exact same amount of rainfall that you need every year for your agricultural project to work. That's probably not going to happen. Didn't happen many decades ago before we were dealing with global warming, and it's definitely not happening now. So, when you kind of think about these things that are definitely not going to hold true, then you would need to rethink your project. You need to think, how do we kind of change some of the activities in this so that those components those components that are not that need to be addressed and dealt with are addressed and dealt with. And so that actually is a really important assumption and a really important conversation to ultimately have. Because if you're sitting there thinking this isn't going to work, then you need to literally go back to the drawing board and work with the project, the community, and the various stakeholders to say, okay, we've got this assumption. We know this assumption's not going to hold true. What do we do about it? And so that's why this is such an important planning tool. Because it's not just a written document. It's literally kind of informing a conversation continuously. So finally, I just want to kind of come back to this, like, how do we think through this process? Basically, in order to kind of create these different things, again, you see assumptions in every single one of these steps, which is why I just spent a few minutes emphasizing it. But you've got, so an activity plus assumptions is going to ultimately equal your output. And you can do this. We use a lot of if something and assumptions hold true, then this. And that's kind of how that's a really important, if-then statements are really important when you're creating this document. Because you want to, as you're kind of moving up each level of the document, you want to think through, if this, then this is going to happen. If this, then this is going to happen. And that's kind of how you should kind of think about kind of moving from activities up to overall goals and back down.
Cool. So now we're sort of going to run you through an existing EWB project. And just to give you guys a very brief background on what the project is, it's a community in northwest Cameroon. It's a very rural community in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, really close to the Nigerian border. The government even didn't know about the existence of this community, so they were not providing any services. So that's how remote this place is. But they reached out to EWB-USA through a 501 application, and they stated that we want help to improve our quality of life, which is a very broad goal. We don't even know what that means, really. But then they had a whole laundry list of different items that they wanted. Some of them were like really absurd. Some we'll probably never implement. But the top ones that they mentioned was access to clean water, sanitation was the next, then improved education and some other things. So through that 501 application, they really established the project goal and also the specific objective of the first project. Now, the first project within our program was to provide the community with access to clean drinking water and to do catchment area protection, which is something that they mentioned is the need because they have a lot of cattle that are grazing. They go and defecate close to the water, and they knew that that's what is making the kids sick. So starting from there, as we mentioned, we are sort of working our way down. And beyond this point, you can have a whole list of things. It doesn't have to be one or two lines. And within the objectives, these are some of the results. But just thinking about, I'm sure like a lot of you have different projects beyond water supply. So just think about like how you would adapt this in your circumstances. But looking at sort of this set of results, this sort of outputs, what would be some inputs that you would have to think about in deriving these outputs?
That's right, we're asking you.
Wake up. We're asking you guys. So
read through the expected results and just think about some of, if you guys those of you who have worked on water projects, kind of What types of activities?
First, we have mapping water sources in the community.
Mapping water sources, yeah.
Yep.
That's one of the initial things we did,
Yep.
to do a topographical survey of the entire land.
Determining what materials you have to work with as far as construction.
Yeah, materials procurement, but also like finding out what's available, what's not. Yes?
Like hygiene education for like
Yeah, that's a really important one, educational component of that.
Determining the current structure, if they have, or if they're water board, water committee.
Yeah, that's also, that's
So-
a really, really important one, because we go there assuming that the community does not have water. Of course, they have water, that's why they're alive and they're functioning. So that is, in the development field, we have this whole thing, like, do no harm. You know, whatever you do needs to build on whatever they have existing. That needs to be the baseline of what you do. So establishing that is really important. Yeah,
Survey water usage and the demand.
yeah, the demand calculations, all that. So those are all really, really good. I'm sure like a lot of this will like show here. One of the really cool things that we did with our project, because we had a lot of public health specialists, public health students in our chapter, we did an entire public health survey in the community. So this is going door to door or doing a random sampling of the community and then trying to understand their current usages as it relates to water, their understanding of health and hygiene. Do they even practice that? Do they even know the benefits of washing their hands with soap and whatnot? Other things, materials procurement, someone mentioned, then signing an agreement with the community. That's also a specific task that you're putting in. So after you have that, you sort of work your way to the right. And thinking about how you improve a community's quality of life through providing clean water, what are some measures for that? Like, how will you go about, even measuring that? Does anyone have any ideas?
Less sickness.
Less sickness. There you go.
Okay.
What would be other effects of, providing clean water? And always think about like things you can measure. Yeah.
If they have a school, just higher attendance in school.
Bingo. There you go. You just mentioned the two that we have up there. Reduce incidence of diarrheal disease, reduce school absenteeism. What we did in the community was to engage the community as much as possible. Like, what are the main issues? And getting the community to collectively agree on them was as crucial as us raising enough money or having enough expertise. And they mentioned that kids are getting sick, and as a result of that, they, have a high absenteeism rate. How would you go about measuring those two? How would you go about measuring each of those two fields?
What means of verification?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Anyone?
What
Yeah.
means of verification would you use?
How would you measure diseases rate? Yeah.
Examining the school attendance.
School attendance.
Reference,
So school attendance through the school teachers, so the PTA if that exists. Public health survey results. Now, the initial public health survey that we conducted, we're planning on doing a mid-project or program survey again, and also an endpoint survey. But we're also working with the local healthcare providers in gathering basic data on a continual level. Now, assumptions, there's a whole list of assumptions that we've had going in. The biggest one, as it pertains to most EWB project, is the behavioral change component. We assume that the community is going to really adopt whatever change we are trying to make. They're going to start hand washing. They're going to start using this new water. Small things make a big difference. The taste of water, because of there's chlorine, that can be, that can dissuade a community from using that water. Or their distance to whatever source of water they have, that can be a deterrent to adopting new, clean water. So I'm not going to go row by row, but just thinking about the next row. Obviously, if you're trying to measure access to clean water for a community, what does access to clean water mean? Like, what is the main issue right now? The community is spending way too much time collecting water that is not good quality, and then there's not enough supply year-round. So those are three very measurable things we can measure. We can measure water quality. We can measure the time it takes for people to get the water. We can measure if they have consistent water throughout the year. So always think about like how would you go about quantifying the impact that you're going to have. Another huge assumption is land rights. You're assuming that you're going to be able to get land rights. This can be a water project, this can be a school project, or whatever you're trying to construct. You need to be able to establish that. EWB has a requirement for 5% community contribution. It's easy to just assume that, oh, that's what, like $5,000? Of course the community can do it. But that might be really hard in an indigenous community who have, a different definition of what money is, what money can do. And then at this point, you're sort of going more infrastructure heavy. You're building a water system. You're thinking about like establishing a water committee. So it gets a little easier to sort of be able to measure that. Number of water tap stands that you've built, number of people you've trained, and things like that. You can see there's numbers. There's also letters, and you can do whatever you want to do. This is mostly so people can follow as you go across. A will relate to A, and then in the indicators you have like A to D. So that sort of comprises of the entire the 4 measures that we have over there. So all this, a lot of this is semantics, and however you want to do it is up to you.
And just kind of going back to the indicators, you can see here that as you get higher up, it's increased quantity, reduced, and versus numbers, percentage. That tends to be a pretty distinct, a pretty clear distinction between what you're looking at for your outputs versus kind of purpose and objectives.
Yeah. A lot of these indicators will be the work that you do. When you go on an assessment trip or you go on a post-implementation trip, you're getting the opportunity to collect the data. But always think about like what would the community be able to do once EWB is not there. If they have a meeting every month, they can have a log that they can produce, then maybe transmit it to EWB-USA. But just thinking beyond the 5-year commitment that you're making to the community is very, very crucial.
Is there anything out here? I mean, you guys are, I'm assuming, reading this as we're throwing this up here. Is there anything up here that kind of jumps out as you as maybe not being measurable or maybe being a little bit funny? Just curious. And
just completing the whole form. And again, we're going to make all this available. There's templates for water projects, for the DC chapter is also working on an ICT project, a educational center project. That's also available on the EWB-USA website. So just thinking about the different inputs, thinking about the indicators and the assumptions, we actually had a whole other list of assumptions. This is just a very, very long, probably like 3 pages just of assumptions. And we had to pick or join 2 or 3 assumptions together to come up with this list. So these are very well thought out. What we try to do with our chapter, and this is something that we've found very helpful, is to have a meeting at the beginning of first student chapter semester or after you've come back from a trip, to dedicate a whole meeting in producing this document, working with everyone who's there to brainstorm, what is going on, and to sort of revise it after you come back from a trip, because I'm sure you're going to have come with new assumptions, or you're going to find some information about the community that maybe contradicts whatever information you had before.
Does anyone have any questions on this kind of thing? Yes.
Yeah. Is this related to the program or the project?
Project.
Yeah.
So the overall goal may change?
No, so what I would say is the overall goal would be across the whole program,
Okay.
and then the other components would change by project.
So the first row is the program, the remainder are the project. I mean, it makes
that's what
sense when you say it.
Yeah.
I just-
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, because all the projects should be going towards impacting, improving, no idea how to pronounce that, quality of life. But each individual project is going to be different. So you're going to have a water catchment project, you're going to have a school project. So so I would say the program would have the same overall goal, and then the other things would change based on the project.
So just out of curiosity, like how many of you let's say I'm working on a water project, which is show of hand. So a lot.
So
not
everyone.
So this would be really helpful when we pass on.
Right. So one of the things with logical frameworks is that it ends up being a little bit of wordsmithing. You tend to, because you have to kind of think through, like, I mean, logically, does this make sense? Does this come after that? And so there are a couple of there's a couple of different challenges that occur when you're kind of putting together a logical framework that I'm just going to run through really quickly that you should try to avoid when you're doing this. The first one we call definitional logic. If you do one thing and then you do the same thing, you're going to do the same thing. But that's not really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to, so if you improve institutional capacity for delivering goods, then yes, you've strengthened institutions. And that's not a bad thing to do, but you've literally done the same thing. And that's not really the point of this tool. So the point is that if you do something, then there's going to ultimately be a different result or some level of a result. Can you show us what the result? So a better way of kind of looking at this is, if you've improved institutional capacity for delivering goods and services, then what have you done for a different group in the community, or kind of what is the overall result and or impact? So improve service delivery for citizens. Does that make sense? It's a little bit, can be a little bit confusing. So that's kind of how you want to think about when you're going kind of up the process of doing this step. If you've done this, then what's going to happen? And it shouldn't be the same thing. So the next thing we have here is categorical logic. Sometimes, if you increase school completion rates, yes, if you increase school completion rates, if you improve preschool, primary school, secondary school, you will increase school completion rates. But you could also actually put that all into one bubble and say, if you've improved, school in general, you've increased school completion rates. So the real thing is you want to ask yourself, how are you going to do this? What is it that you're actually doing in order to kind of increase these completion rates or improve the school in general? And so, you look at things like reduced cultural barriers to education, increased access to education, improved quality of education, secondary education. So you don't want to make this just a kind of a laundry list of categories that are the exact same. You want to think about kind of different aspects within it that are going to lead to that result. And the last one is, and Raul and I kind of laughed at this one because we are very, very guilty of this. We do this all the time when we're putting together logical frameworks. And it's something that it's because this is kind of, there is a lot of wordsmithing, and there's you're trying to get as much information as you possibly can into these little boxes. You tend to kind of put a bunch of things together and use phrases like and, through, by, in order to, et cetera, et cetera. And what you really want to do is make single sentences. These should be two separate sentences. You improved health conditions of target population, period. Will lead to, So improved health service delivery will lead to improved health conditions of target population. So if you find yourself putting an and or a through or a by, you've probably actually moved yourself into the next category, and it's actually an if-then. And it's probably the result of something. So you want to kind of think about that when you're using it. So if you have some very long, convoluted sentence, then you probably can split it up a little bit, and you actually want to move that into a different category. Now, you can definitely use the word and. I mean, sometimes there are actual lists, but think about is it a list, or is it two separate concepts that you're trying to put together?
Also, there's a lot of like development lingo that we usually use, and we are both culprits of that. Things like empower, or things like words sustainable, like words that can mean many things, but it can mean nothing at the same time. So try and avoid that. Like try and avoid using very, very vague lingo and go into specifics of what that really means. How would you translate it in the community's words?
And think about, is it measurable?
Yeah.
If you've empowered someone, how do you measure that?
How many
and
units
that's
of
really,
empowerment?
that's, yeah, how many units of empowerment? And that's really where, that's, I mean, if you say you've empowered a group of women, well, what does that mean? Does it mean that they now have savings accounts? Does it mean that they now have, jobs? Are they, are they bringing their children to, like, are they able to kind of clothe their children? Whatever it means, but like, what does empowerment mean? So I think that's, it's a very valid way to think about it.
Nope, forgot the arrows. So just bringing everything together, these are just some recommendations we have. This is a EWB requirement, so every chapter needs to produce this as part of their 5, 21, 22, 23, whatever you guys have now. But do not think of this as a requirement only. This is something that is very, very useful. This is pretty much your project. You define your project in one piece of paper. So just think about how powerful that is. You try and engage the community as much as possible in making this. Again, as I said, a lot of it might not make sense initially to the community, but ask them questions and like keep on probing. Like, how would you go about measuring it? Like, how do you know that your kids are getting sick? And people would know. People can usually translate those into their terms. As I mentioned, create this during the initial planning process of the project, but keep revising this as you go along. Every time you come back from a trip, every time you start a new project, before you go on an implementation trip. Now that's a very interesting one to do because you get to really see like how your thought process sort of changes over a period of time. Try to sort of keep it concise, keep it 1 page, maximum 2 page. I don't think people will go over 3 pages, but try and keep it 1 page as much as possible.
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on how many activities you do. I mean, you can have multiple activities. You don't need to put every single like minute detail on there that you might put in a work plan. These are higher level activities, but it doesn't mean that you can't, don't start cutting because you're trying to keep it onto 1 or 2 pages, activities that you should be doing or measuring. But do try to be as concise. And again, it's not a work plan. This is something that's a little bit higher level. So think about what activities kind of represent kind of a laundry list of other smaller activities that you might find in a work plan.
Keeping it logical, clear, and free of jargon that I've already mentioned. Instead of using empowerment, use more specific words. Also, this is a very, very powerful document because it is industry-wide accepted. Every development organization has their own version of Logframes. Every donor asks for a Logframe. So use this as like a fundraising tool too. So it's very important to not have too many engineering or public healthy word in there. Just have more something that a layman, or not a layman, a very educated layman
Something that I
will be
can
able to
understand, that would be great. No, I'm just kidding.
And have one per project. This is a project level tool. If you have multiple projects, create a new one for each of them. Do you have any questions? We have our email addresses, so feel free to email us after this. Yeah.
How do I effectively use this framework to complement my alternatives analysis? Like if I have one specific goal, but there can be many different activities or ways I can go about achieving that goal. How do I use it to assess which one might be the best way or best alternative?
That's a really good question. When Engineers Without Borders talks about alternatives, it's usually alternatives of ways you can implement the tool. So if you're working on a water project, you can either drill a well, you can either cap a spring, or you can, I don't know, I'm sure tons of options. You can purify the existing water and whatnot. So those are the alternatives that you're talking about. But here, I guess at this level, you're talking more about the fact that you're providing some sort of technology, some sort of intervention in providing the clean water. So I would not think about it in the terms of alternatives analysis or this being a tool that can help with alternatives analysis. I think that's a whole different other process that you have to go through, where you think about what are the things that you evaluate, what are the criteria you evaluate each mode of implementation through, whether it's cost, whether it's time taken, whether it's amount of disease that it saves, whatnot. So I think it's very important to sort of disassociate each of those. This is more of a planning, project level planning tool, as opposed to project implementation tool, if that makes any sense.
That being said, there are ways, when you're thinking about alternatives and stuff, think about assumptions. Think about, is this stuff measurable? Mm-hmm. But you would have to do one of these for each of your alternatives, is basically what it would look like. And I don't know if that would be worthwhile, like for your time, but I certainly think mm-hmm. that kind of thinking through measurable indicators when you're thinking through your different alternatives, as well as the assumptions that you have to make, is very valuable. So it's not that pieces of these couldn't be used, but I would say the whole the tool as a whole wouldn't be kind of applicable to that situation. Any other questions?
Yes.
It's more of a comment.
Yeah.
I'm a certified value specialist, and we do something very similar called function analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with that. But one of the tools that may be helpful for the chapters is there's the Miles Foundation, and that's the group that basically pushes value engineering, that we should be doing this. And they have a list of action verbs and measurable nouns.
Mm-hmm.
Because improved infrastructure doesn't say anything.
Right.
What does that mean, like we were talking about? And so they have the squishy words, and they just get rid of those and really replacing what we spend a lot of time working on verb-noun pairs to describe everything a project must do.
Oh.
And that just may be a good resource for everybody.
Yeah.
What was that resource again?
It's Lawrence Miles Foundation. Trying to remember, I can look at the website, because I called it up. It's thevaluefoundation.com or .org. But if you do Lawrence D. Miles Foundation, you'll find it.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Cool.
And again, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. If you, I'm going to do a quick little pitch for my company, which is always looking for socially minded engineers. So if you have any kind of interest or questions about Cardno, please feel free to contact me as well. It's actually a global company, but it's Australian based. But thank you for having me and us.
All right, thanks guys.